They're watching you, Neo.
Who is?
You know the question, just as I did.
A cookie!
No, it's not a cookie!
Hi everyone, I'm the Broken Meeple. Win or lose, I'm going to be honest with you. And today we're looking at a recent Kickstarter fulfilled game called Neon Hope. This was completely out of the blue for me. I had no idea of its existence. I don't really pay attention to Kickstarters. And all of a sudden, publisher got in touch and said, do you want it? And by the sound of it, I thought, okay, I'll give this a bash. It was basically portrayed as a storytelling game in a kind of pseudo-cyberpunk-y world. I mean, not full-on cyberpunk, but we're certainly talking neon futuristic times. And it's kind of maybe more akin to Netrunner if you take out a ton of the cyborgs and things like that. But the idea with it is that it was meant to be portrayed as kind of like a solo or group alternate version to Arkham Horror LCG, which is a game that's been on my shelf and is, a really solid game. One with very rich narrative storytelling, one with some pretty decent mechanics, although the Chaos Bag is a dubious one in that. And it's been going on for years, and obviously it's, a solid game, but it's Cthulhu. So the idea of playing something with a different theme was like, okay, let's run with it. But of course, Kickstarters and all that lot, you have to be a little wary at times, so I was curious to see how this one would fare, and whether it could be a decent contender or alternative to the Arkham Horror that we already know.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
So in Neon Hope, you play through a 5-game campaign, and the games get longer as you go through. So your first one is only going to take you so much time, and then they're going to get progressively longer as you go through, and each one will have different ending potentials. So we'll have some story narratives that you read from this book, as well as some potential different routes and conclusions based on whether you succeed, fail, or even just if you find or interact with certain elements during the game. There's certainly a decent amount of branching paths that you can go down here, but for the most part it's essentially 5 games you go through in a campaign. For this setting anyway, they can easily just make more scenarios. You will have a staging deck for each scenario, and this is made up of a mix of all sorts of different cards. I mean, there'll be, surveillance cards, different people you can interact with, different locations, different, hindrances, sealed doors, all these sort of things that is basically like the Mythos deck for... well, actually, no, it's not the Mythos deck for Arkham, because this is more the scenario itself. This is going to get spat out by the scenario, which will have different chapter cards that tell you to set up certain elements. So let's, without too many spoilers, we'll go into the first scenario. You basically you go into a nightclub, so you've got the nightclub location, a barkeeper, and all that, and the dance floor. You're trying to find somebody in particular, a specific contact, and then you're going through the crowds. You then find another location. You're trying to find a hidden basement. And then obviously, enemies might come by and hinder your progress. So there's, that's that kind of scenario. So the staging deck would have the locations, the people, the different hazards, surveillance cameras, that kind of thing. And what you will have is essentially a deck of action cards. Now, this isn't a deck building game. You essentially have this as hand management. These action cards you will use to bolster some of the skill tests you do. The rules are pretty straightforward. You have your standee, and, we'll get onto the components a little bit later, but essentially the standee will be at one of the locations. So the standee could be at the barkeep, for example, at the bar, for example, and you will do tests. So these tests could be investigate, so you're trying to get clues. It could be get support, which is to get bonus markers off various characters. You could fight enemies. You could also hack mainframes and stuff like that. And normally you would just simply do the test and it will have a result. But you can play these action cards to make them better, introduce other effects, that kind of thing, to make your situation better. And these cards can be upgraded during the game. Anytime you succeed tests fully, when you clear out certain cards, or just at periodic points throughout the game, you will gain resources which you are able to then use to upgrade your cards and various other things during the round even. Not just in between games, but during the game itself. So we'll get onto that a little bit later. But the way that you do these tests essentially stems from these chips. So I've got a playmat here with a bunch of them on it. But basically you're going to have 16 of these tokens and 3 spare face down, and these represent essentially negative and positive modifiers. So these are, you've got a 0 plus 2, a skull with a -1 that has a special rule, 0 plus 2 plus 1, -2, -3, all these different modifiers. And you will basically place them face down before the game starts. And whenever you have to do a test, you choose which ones to flip over. Once all of them are flipped over, then you reset and basically it replenishes itself and goes again. Introducing kind of more of a sort of a little bit more of a deterministic-ish type variation to what the Chaos Bag was, because the Chaos Bag is basically you put the tokens back in and it's the same random element. Whereas this one, when you start uncovering tokens, you're going to be able to sort of go, well, I've used up a lot of the positives so far, so these next few tests are going to be a bit more difficult, and make decisions based on that. As you go through the scenario, more staging cards will come out, the story will progress, and depending on who you interact with, you'll have story elements to read as the scenario goes on, but also in between games, when you finish, depending on whether it was success or fail, you'll read other story elements before upgrading more stuff in your deck. Well, I say deck, your cards that are available, and moving on to the next scenario. By losing, it's based on an endurance mechanic. So you have a certain amount of endurance based on player count, and once you've played all your various action cards, if you want to get them back, you have to rest, or focus, I think the game calls it. And once you do that, you do get your cards back, but your endurance goes down, and this represents your hand size. So, you have 10 action cards to begin with. Let's say I've got 10 endurance as a solo player. If I focus, it goes down to 9, which means one of these cards I don't get back. And the more times you keep having to rest as the scenario goes on, the less of these cards you get to bring back to use again, and the quicker you're going to have to keep focusing. So it's more of a, you don't focus that much to begin with, but then as the scenario gets into its late game, if you haven't finished it yet, you're going to start using up your cards more quickly, and things are going to get a little bit tricky. And there's a couple of little other elements like keys for certain unlocking different parts of the scenario, or focus. Not focus. Hope and stress, which is basically discarding cards and not having to discard cards. It's a mitigation thing. And as I said, with get support, you can get these little tokens which allow you to use as temporary boosts to a particular skill check. But of course, you need a skill check to go get them in the first place. So one for one, I guess. And that's basically how the game progresses. You go through each scenario, through what the staging deck spits out of you, using the modifier tokens, upgrading your cards from either your specific action card selection or your own personal tool deck, which gets you various things like a company ID or some suspicious looking green capsule drugs, stuff like that, to help you with your character. And of course, there's multiple characters to pick from, particularly if you get the expansion, which adds a few more.
Wingers, dingus, listen up.
So we got to talk about components first, and this is hit and miss depending on how much you're willing to spend, because this game is not cheap. It fares around the 80-90 euro mark, or sorry, 80-90 quid mark on Kickstarter, I believe it was, like 100 euro, and that was just to get the game. So 5 scenarios with basic cardboard tokens for these, for this modifier thing, normal cards, no insert, nothing special, just cardboard tokens, and that's it. That's expensive for this game. I mean, people want to compare how much money you've spent on Arkham Horror LCG. And yes, I know, if you buy a bunch of the sets, you will spend a lot of money on Arkham Horror LCG, but 100 euros is still quite a bit. But Arkham Horror gives you some half-decent components, it gives you phenomenal artwork, and it gives you, the Chaos Bag and all those gubbins, and a decent amount of replayability. This one is good on most of those fronts, but the components here in the base version don't really justify that price tag. I mean, the cardboard tokens you have for these modifiers will wear out pretty quickly upon using them. It's not particularly good cardboard stock, and it's very basic. It's definitely got Kickstarter written all over it in terms of like being a fairly low budget affair despite having a high price tag. Really, that price tag is mostly, buying the scenarios themselves and, a wad of cards. And there is a wad of cards in this game. You get quite a lot of them, but even then. But then on top of that, the artwork in this, not a fan. I'm not a fan of it. I mean, I know it suits some people. Perhaps it's more of a stylistic thing. I can't draw, so fair enough. But, the cover doesn't really scream out anything when you see it. And the card artwork itself ranges from, it's alright, I could go with it, to pretty bland and not that interesting. And some of the faces and the humans and stuff like that, they look kind of weird, really. It's, there is definitely Some artwork I'm okay with, and most of it I'm not. You know, I think the locations tend to be better, you know, where you can see like the backdrop. You can imagine it as a bit of a sort of comic strip thing, but when it focuses on characters or just random little like pictures for stuff like hacking cards and stuff, it's like, I don't know, I'm not as keen, especially again for that price tag, and you're comparing it to something like Arkham Horror LCG, which has, you know, great artwork across the board. This one is, you know, not that interesting, or certainly not a style that I'm a fan of.
I admire its purity.
But you could upgrade to the deluxe version, and that will give you these funky poker chips for the modifiers, which are very nice in the hand. You know, they're definitely worth having. I think it gives you the E-Raptor insert as well. I'd have to double check, but the E-Raptor have done their UV printed insert for this game. And from by the same token, conveniently, the ones who affiliate with this channel now, you have these really nice acrylic tokens for the various different counters that you have. And they are really nice acrylic tokens. Granted, you're going to have to give yourself blisters peeling off all the paper on acrylic. It's the one thing I hate about acrylic, having to peel off all the paper that's on them. It's really annoying. But, you know, once you've got them, they look fantastic and they feel nice in the hand. So they are, yeah, it is a really nice selection of tokens. But then the price tag shoots up to about 190 euros. I'm not frigging kidding. That is insane. 200 odd euros practically for this. That's a tall order, even with the upgraded components. I mean, 90 to 100 was already a bit insane, but 200, you better make sure you like this game, because otherwise that is quite an insane price tag.
Shut up and take my money!
Now let's jump into learning the game. This is a bit of a faux pas as well for it. The rules themselves are not complicated. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff on, you know, the cards, and there's the you know, different reference cards you've got and some keywords, but for the most part, if you've played this type of game before, you'll pick it up pretty quickly in terms of like, oh right, this is the core rule set. And you don't do a lot on your turn. I mean, you change location and then you do tasks, and there's usually 4 different tasks and you're basically just mixing and matching. That's kind of the main turn sequence. And then you draw an encounter card and do what it says. And then basically things will happen as you do the rest of the scenario. So the rules are not necessarily complicated. The game, however, doesn't make it easy for you to get to that stage. This rulebook will explain particular rules fine. You will understand how the encounter phase works when you read it. You will understand how tools work and allies and how the setup works. The problem is that I swear, in terms of the layout of this book, somebody basically writ all the rules in various piecemeal, shoved it into a blender and hit frap, because the layout of this is all over the shop. You know, it tells you specific, like, oh yeah, this is how you do these particular bits, but then doesn't tell you a key component of this until about 2 pages on. You know, like, oh yeah, it tells you can do tests and things like that, right? And when you do tests, you remove the tokens and stuff like that. Okay, what happens when I remove the last token from something? About 2 pages on, it will explain how that works. I could do with knowing that when I'm told how to do the tests, that would be more important. But then also, you've got like really bizarre layouts where, if you go into the comprehensive rules, you've got the round structure and how to perform a task, right? That's the first thing you see, how to perform a task in the grid, right? About 2 pages later, you actually get into the card anatomy of what the different cards are. I feel like this should be a little bit sooner in your book, not 3/4 of the way through it. And it does try to lure you in with a quick start rule. So you can read the quick start section and get straight into the first episode without too much hassle. Honestly, it's not good enough. The quick start rules will get you set up. Yes, you'll be able to set up the first scenario, but then you would also be able to do that if you just read the main campaign book. The gameplay rules in it, though, are too bare bones. It doesn't go into enough detail, and as I said, key things like what happens when you remove the last token from a card, you know, are not explained in the quick start rules. So you'll quickly reach a point where you don't know how to progress. You might be able to guess, but I don't expect to have to guess, I expect to be told. And that's just, I mean, it's not a tutorial even, it is basically just a very summarized version of the rules that doesn't explain every rule that you need to know, and not even really in the right order. So you might as well just go straight into the comprehensive rules. And even then, you still have the issue of the book being laid out in a weird way. That is one factor. The other factor is the smorgasbord of cards you've got. I mean, there's a bunch of cards on the table here and, you know, in this insert and that, but I mean, I've got another bit of the insert here with cards. There's more cards in the box. There's quite a lot of them, and they're just mixed up all over the place. They're distinguished by a tiny little little symbol in the bottom corner of the card that denotes what set it's from. That's it. That's the only way you know whether something should go together, because a particular set could have lead cards, it could have enemy cards, it could have staging cards, it could have player cards, it could have all sorts in there. It's all mixed together, so you can't separate them by category, you have to separate them by expansion symbol. But if you do that in the base set, you're going to have to baggy up all these different encounter sets, you know, and you don't even necessarily know at first, you know, which one are meant to be this, which one's meant to be this and that. You need the E-Raptor insert to even stand a remote chance. And that's only because they put the pictures on the side of the box to explain where things go. Because the E-Raptor insert does the notes of building the thing do not tell you this front. In fact, it took me a while before I even noticed that when you look at this side of this particular insert, there's nothing to tell you anything. You look at this side and there's some little symbols for those encounter sets telling you which compartment they go in.
That's a start.
It made setup and learning the game a bit more of a chore than it needed to be, and there was just a lot of FAQ moments, referencing and trying to think, how exactly do I do this? And that is a problem. You're going to have to put up with this barrier to entry.
Making it bigger doesn't make it clearer.
Now, as much as I've bragged a bit on the components and the price and, you know, learning a bit, what happens when you get past those barriers to entry? You're actually, genuinely, in with a pretty good game, actually. The gameplay is fun. I really quite enjoy it. It's got a similar vibe to the Arkham Horrorness, but here's some key differences. I mean, firstly, the setting. If you're not into Cthulhu and you prefer a little bit of cyberpunky, Cyberdyne, Netrunner type thing, then, you know, this will be a good setting for you. You can put on some neon 80s songs, you know, some synthwave in the background like I did, and you can have yourself a pretty thematic experience. The story is not half bad either. You know, it's not the most, like, gripping of stories ever, and you're certainly thrown into it without much context to begin with, but you do get quite a lot of different, you know, ways you can set up each round as you go on later on. That classic check the campaign log for if you did this, but I mean, there's a lot of them. You know, you have got a lot of different conclusions, and you know, you want a bit of context with this. Let's go to scenario. Which scenario is this one? This one is scenario. Come on, find me the scenario. Jesus Christ, there is quite a lot of pages in here, so I have to try and find out. So by the time you get to scenario 4, right? 4 out of 5, okay? There is 11, 19, there's basically about 20-something different ways the game could set up, a bunch of sections for reading, and then conclusions, you have about 33. Yeah. Now, some of these you do go through several as you do it, but let's just say there's a lot of different ways you could end and start a scenario based on what you do in the early ones. The game says that your decisions will matter. It's like RPGs when you're playing them on the PC, where it says so-and-so will remember this. It actually does matter in this, and I'm glad to see that the narrative is taken seriously, because it does help with the replay value. You've got a decent amount of replay value here beyond just playing the 5 scenarios. Choose a different character, choose a different type of plane, and go down a different route and see what happens. And it can mean that you could play this a good 2 or 3 times and still get a slightly different experience and have good fun. The gameplay from the mechanics standpoint I like as well. I mean, like getting the secrets off the cards gets a little repetitive over time, just constantly having to drain this token off and constantly doing that. But I like the idea that you can get these little tokens from different allies, so you could skip them entirely, but, you know, if somebody happens to have a couple of perception boosts and you know that you're going to have to do a lot of perception checks soon and it's not your forte, it's like, well, you know what, can I get some support off you? And that might make my job easier later on. It's a good little tactical decision. You've got your own little personal toolkit of cards, which has, you know, various, you know, different unique stuff to your character in there that you can level up. But then you've also got your action cards themselves, and there's level 1, level 2, level 3, so you can level these up and make yourself a little bit more specialized. But I really love the fact that you can upgrade during the game. That's not been done a lot before. That feels very much more like an RPG PC game. Because normally, like with things like Arkham, you get to the end of the scenario and it's like, right, here's all your XP. Now, before the next scenario starts, do all your leveling up. This one lets you do it during the game. when you focus and get back your cards, you're getting these resources for completing checks, and then at that point, you're actually allowed to spend them to upgrade from your toolkit and various bits. You know, I think it's restricted during the game which bits you can upgrade. You can't do everything, but still, I love the fact that during the round I can just sort of go, well, you know what? I do need to do a lot of perception checks. This green octagon stuff, it's got a bit of a downside. I will suffer more stress. It is a drug after all, don't do drugs. But the extra perception it gives you could be useful. I might decide to upgrade with this card. A subsequent play, I'm getting swarmed by enemies. You know what? I could probably do with some self-defense training. That would probably help. I mean, how do you learn that during a thing? But you know what I mean. It's this kind of thing, and you can decide. I mean, a liquid Kevlar jacket. There's not particularly a lot of fighting in this scenario. I won't bother with that. But you know what? This Mona and Luca ally or something, I need some more charisma. That could be pretty useful. You can be more tactical. And that also stems into this grid. So there's a pointless playmat I've got here with 16 slots on it. Whatever. You don't need the playmats. They're kind of pointless. But I like the idea that, unlike the Chaos Bag, you actually end up seeing all the tokens that are flipped. So these are all face down to begin with, and you'll do your tests, you know, with one or more tokens, depending what it is. And it's like, okay, right, this token I do -2. Ah, damn it. Well, hang on, I can reveal another one. +3. Okay, that's a +1. Done the test. Cool. Now they're staying flipped. I know I've used my best positive and a negative there. All right, let's go again. Ooh, auto succeed. Ah, that one's done now. So I can't auto succeed again until I reset everything. And then you might go through, and let's just take a bit of example. So, you know, I've got some pretty shoddy tokens here, but let's just say I've got like, here we go, like we've got the +2 here and the +2, and they're already revealed. It's like, oh dang, I've used up quite a lot of my positive tokens here. So now my test, as I flip more over, -3, skull, auto fail, -2, -1 skull, -2. So you can kind of not necessarily predict, because 3 of these tokens are not in the they're on a side card. They're out of play until you reset again. So you can't game it. You can't entirely game the system, but you can make an educated choice. You know, I flipped up a bunch of negative tokens already and failed a bunch of tests. Well, next bunch of tests I do are going to be pretty good. They're going to have lots of positive markers, hopefully. So I might not have to spend so many action cards. I could go in on something that seems out of my reach, but you know what? I'm going to give it a go because I've got some good tokens left over. I like this tactical element because it makes it a little less random. Yeah, it's a random element. You have got the RNG of this, but it is quite cool that you do have that aspect.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
But the swinginess is not that entirely gone. I mean, the encounter deck can throw you for a loop at times. There are some cards in there that just won't do anything, and some that will just completely mess you over at times. And there are a few which like lead into other cards, and sometimes you might end up drawing like about 3 or 4 cards from this deck. Suddenly your surveillance doubles, and you know, it can have repercussions as a result. It's maybe a little bit, you know, this one encounter deck is probably a bit more swingy compared to a lot of other LCGs like Marvel Champions and Arkham Horror when it comes to its function. But I like the way that this is a little bit more tactical as a test modifier mechanic. You know, I reckon the Chaos Bag from Arkham Horror would do well if it introduced this type of mechanic to it. It's a welcome change, and it just made me care more about what I was doing from, you know, after every little test. And I say, it's a nice little boost.
Good job.
So Neon Hope is one that I would consider to be called a game of potential, because the initial barriers are pretty hefty barriers. You've got a price tag that I think is way too much for what the game is, especially if you up it with the deluxe tokens, of which having an insert to organize the cards and having these chips and having like proper acrylic tokens is going to be pretty good for the game. If this is one that you're going to keep, I think you might want to invest in those tokens, but man, it's going to cost you a pretty penny, way more than it probably should. And then once you do get into it, you've got a bit of a chore, you know, an evening to sort out all these cards between their expansion symbols. And if you don't have the insert, it's going to be a nightmare to work out how you're going to bag everything up and stuff. And then coupled with the rulebook, which annoyingly decides, oh yeah, we can explain things reasonably well. We're just going to make you like go for a labyrinth in order to figure out where the hell we're actually going to explain it. This is also a chore in the sense that the first couple of games are going to get frustrating because you're going to be referencing this book a lot. You're going to have FAQs, you know, go on BGG, and there's definitely enough FAQ questions being asked, and it's going to make your first couple of games frustrating. But the rules themselves are not complicated, it's just they're not explained well. But the thing about Neon Hope is that it is very much initial barriers, because once you get past those barriers, you are in with a pretty solid game here. A good contender to the likes of something like Arkham Horror LCG. I wouldn't say that this one is, at the same level as Arkham Horror LCG. I mean, you've got the artwork not being particularly interesting. You've got, the issues I've just mentioned with the barriers and stuff. And I would say that the narrative, as good as it can be with this, because you do have different branching paths, is going to be much more interesting and sort of in-depth and written better than, in Arkham Horror LCG than in this. But I think for an indie Kickstarter, it's done a pretty solid job of giving you some interesting gameplay mechanics. The different cards that come out of the staging deck, the different encounter cards themselves, this tactical grid system with the tokens, this is a welcome change and one that I would like to see Arkham Horror LCG maybe pick up in the future, or just some other games that do this kind of mechanic consider, because I think this adds just a little bit of that mitigation that you want for a random test modifier. But then on top of that, you've got some pretty good ways to level up your cards. The action card system is a good one for the game itself, and there's an ice cream band if you hear that. But there is a lot of good stuff here. And if it wasn't for those barriers to entry, I could be thinking, oh yeah, this is fantastic, you should totally be grabbing this in ASAP. As it stands, I feel like we have a very solid foundation. And if price and the initial rulebook issues and components-wise, if that doesn't bother you, then you should definitely give this one a look. For me, it's definitely got more positive than bad from the gameplay aspect, but those other issues are big issues, and you can't really ignore them. For this, though, I think I'm going to still give it a 7 out of 10. I'd still give it a seal of approval, because I think the gameplay and the sort of branching tasks and all that are still pretty solid, enough to prop this one up. But this could have been excellent. I think this had the potential, but those negatives are big negatives. And I think what they need to do, pretty sharpish, is find a way to give you a bit better on the production quality without charging the ends of the earth. But, if you want to have the poker chips and that, and if you want to have the insert and game buy the same token stuff as a side thing, then fine. People can spend money if they want to on that. But the base game, I think, needs to be cheaper than the €90 that you're asking for, especially with no way to organise the cards, which there are a lot of them to sort through, especially when they're all mixed up in that. But the rulebook as well badly needs a second edition. You need to, as bare minimum, you need to do a PDF of this, but I would say you need to, if you're going to do a late pledge or a second round of this or something, you need to do second edition rulebook and put that for free in your pledge, because that rulebook is not good enough. It's not dire. I have seen worse rulebooks, and it explains the rules fine. It just does it in a blended order that doesn't make sense, from a logical, reading perspective. Unless you read your books cross-eyed, you're not going to be able to sort of understand what order certain things happen. And I think if you just did a 2.0 version of that rulebook, got somebody proper to edit it and read it and review it, not just between your play groups or whatever, get people you've never heard of before to read the rulebook and make sense of it, I think you could land yourself with a really solid hit here. You have a good foundation.
You have my curiosity, but now you have my attention.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. By all means, check out the rest of my content. I've done some pretty heavy games so far. World Order and Revenant have got reviews on my channel, so you want to find out about some meaty stuff that's come out from Kickstarter and various other means, then by all means check out those videos. By the same token, have done the acrylic tokens for this game, so check them out with the discount code in the description if you want to get some money savings off. But, these they may be expensive, but they are damn good tokens. So if acrylic is your thing and you don't mind splashing out on a game you really like, they're definitely worth it. And the insert is pretty handy as well. Until next time, remember, it's only a game, and I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video. So take care, and bye for now.